Very
Boogieman first.
gothic. I like it.
Well, I had a couple of people online, and they asked the same question. And I don't know if you, well, I assume that you know the Lesser Key of King Solomon. Yes, well, that is one of them. I wanted to paint all to 72, but I stopped at the third, I believe.
It's a big task, right? You need to. Your eyes are bigger than your mouth, as they say.
Most of the times it is. It was a nice project, but at least I thought it was, but that is time consuming amazingly. So
Well,
to
it's a
come
good piece anyway.
to come up with 72 demons from your self, your inner self, that is well, that's a big task.
That,
In
well, I don't blame you for not getting any further, but it's a nice piece anyway.
oh, thank you so much. As a child, we had one big fear: the boogeyman. But what is the boogeyman? And how can we place this creepy creature into modern society? Welcome, or welcome back to the Next Truth podcasts. Let's ask questions. I am your host, Maria Anna van Driel, and today I'm welcoming back the deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer magazine, American folklorist, writer, investigator, and skeptic Benjamin Radford, and speak with him about the reality and non-reality of all that is thought being woo-woo stuff. How are you doing? Because it has been a while since we talked.
Yes, I'm doing okay. Just been very busy. I'm in grad school. I'm also teaching grad school, and I'm working my full-time job. And I have a podcast, and I have a new book coming out. So just been crazy, crazy busy the last few months. But it's calming down. And plus, of course, the pandemic, and it's finally waning a bit. So that's good.
Yes. A new book, you say?
Yes, yes.
That is all about ghosts and sea monsters, or
No, different
no?
topic. Different topic. Yes. So my new book is going to be coming out, I think, in July or August, and the title is America the Fearful.
Oh,
And it's not about ghosts and mysterious things. It's about the use of fear in politics and how politicians and advertisers and activists use fear to motivate people and things like that. So it's basically a media literacy book, and it follows up on my other media literacy book I wrote in 2013, Media Mythmaker. So it's more it's less ghosts and mysteries than media literacy and critical thinking.
based on modern anxiety.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
So I assume that you also are going to mention in your book something about, or perhaps one or two chapters that you are spending on how the history of the church or church in general or religion in general can have done the same.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it
That's
was
it.
written in it was. I mean, I began writing it many years ago. Although it sort of crystallized during the Trump administration because he was so masterful at using fear to scare people and things like that. So that it was a good time to go ahead and bring the book out. And there's lots of discussion of boogeymen. And boogeymen tend to be thought of as being these like fairy tales. But in fact, as you know, boogeymen are alive and well. There are monsters that are, all around us. Sometimes they're fictional, sometimes they're real. And so it's really sort of an exercise in debunking some of the boogeymen.
The boogeyman, that is paranormal. Is that a fairy tale, or is that
Well,
an ex-
of course, boogeymen our classic cultural folklore, right? I mean, every culture has boogeymen in their stories. Sometimes they are literal boogeymen, right? So we have the boogeymen that are manifested as monsters and creatures under the bed, and and Bigfoot and lake monsters and chupacabras and vampires and things like that.
Yes.
And then you have the more metaphorical boogeymen. So then you have the boogeymen, the social boogeymen. So, and again, it depends on the time, right? So, at times, the Jews are the boogeymen. You have the blood libel myth, and you have the anti-Semitism. Other times, you have boogeymen being the satanic panic, right? The fear about Satanists everywhere, and they're behind every tree, and they're looking to kidnap people and kill them and do these horrible things. And then other times, the boogeymen are immigrants, and again, especially here in America during the Trump administration, we had Trump, pointing to these caravans of evil immigrants coming to our borders to burn down the houses and rape our women and kill it's all so silly, right? And so in all these cases, there's a grain of truth, right? It's easy to sort of find one or two pieces or examples and then inflate them into this big terrifying monster. And so that's one of the things I talk about in the book is again the sort of metaphorical boogeyman. And part of the reason is because we can when you label them, when you identify them, you can control it, right? So part of the thing that makes boogeymen scary is that they are they're anonymous. They're conspiracies. There's legions and legions, all these people pulling the strings and all these powerful things. But when you recognize and identify boogeymen, it takes away their power, and it takes away the power of other people to use them against people. So when you have politicians, and again, politicians are just one example, but they're a prominent one. When you have politicians that are pointing to marginalized groups, the Roma, the Jews, the immigrants, whoever it is, and pointing them out as the boogeyman. When you call that out and say this is not the boogeyman, yes, you can find specific examples, but this whole conspiracy, this giant, these giant mythical armies that are out there to harm our country aren't really there. So that's really sort of where I go with it. And really, the bigger point is that there are enough real, actual threats to America and to countries around the world. We don't need to manufacture them. We don't need to make up boogeymen. There are enough actual, real, legitimate problems that we face: economic problems, social problems, many problems. And we need to devote our energy and our attention and our money to solving these problems, not fighting some imaginary boogeyman.
And at this moment, the boogeyman is Russia.
Right. Yeah. Well, there are still many. I mean, there's Trump is still around, so we have QAnon. So QAnon is still around. And one of the boogeymen is now Russia, and there's others as well. One recent example that I looked at, just sort of talk about the more recent research, was do you remember the case of the needle spiking panics? Were you familiar with those? Okay, I'll give you a quick example of that, because it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So in late 2021, there were these rumors going around in the United Kingdom that dozens of people were attacked at nightclubs by one or more people who injected them with syringes, needles, right? Yeah. Yeah. This happened right on Halloween. So this is October, November, December in 2021. And it made huge news. It even made news here, but it was primarily in the UK, and I think a couple other places in Europe, but mainly in the UK. And it was interesting because there was never really any good evidence for it. People would claim that they had come out of the clubs, usually women, sometimes men, but usually women, were going out clubbing and going out having fun. and they suddenly started feeling weird, and they said, "Oh my God, what's happened?" And then they go home and they find a mark or a needle or a stick somewhere, and they say, "Oh my God, I'm somebody injected me with a needle while I was out on the floor." And sometimes they have symptoms, maybe they fainted or whatever else. But there were a couple strange things about this. Number one is that nobody was ever actually attacked. So none of the women claimed to have been attacked or assaulted or raped. It was just something weird happened, and then they later saw a mark, and they said, "I must have been injected by a needle."
Yes.
And so it was, there was this huge panic. In fact, clubs were frisking people before they went in. There was an attempt by the Parliament to pass legislation in the UK that that people had to be screened before they went in there. And so there was this interesting rise in fear, and people were freaking out, and people were afraid to go to clubs. And of course, this is also the time of COVID, right? So this is, it's still the time of COVID. But so that was laid on top of this. And so where the boogeyman comes in here is that it was assumed, wrongly, but it was assumed that there were one or more groups of people, presumably men, maybe Satanists, who knows, who were injecting people with drugs. But when these victims went to the hospital, they never found anything. There was never any. I mean, there were drugs in their system, but there were drugs that they took. It was like alcohol or cocaine or whatever it is, but there was never any evidence of any injected drugs. And so I wrote about that recently. I did some research on that, and it's an interesting case where it sort of blends in folklore and moral panics and boogeymen all wrapped up into one. And then what I found was that it actually jumped the pond. So it, just as it sort of began to calm down in the UK, there were cases here in the US. There was a famous case. It was a tragedy at a concert. I think it was Travis Scott. I think at Astro World, and I'm sure you heard about those. There was a panic. There was a guy performing on stage, and people crushed, and people were killed because they were trampled because of this panic. And one of the stories that emerged out of that was that somebody had been injected by a needle, and of course there was no truth to it whatsoever. So anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but that's an example of where it's very recent. Again, we're only talking 6 months ago, and it made huge news, and it was being taken seriously, and people were freaking out. People were thinking there was some boogeyman, and people were attacking them. And yet, when you look at it scientifically, there was no evidence that this was going on.
Well, I assume that in the moment that you are being injected, you feel the needle penetrating your skin, and you feel that pinch, that prick.
You would think so. You would think so, but they didn't. And this is one of the things that was mysterious about it, was that not only did they not feel it at the time, and in all these cases, it was only afterwards, right? At the time, they're having fun, and then they start feeling weird. And then they go out with their friends and they find some mark. And in some ways, this is actually very similar to alien abductions, like people who claim to have been abducted by aliens and taken off. And then through hypnosis or recovered memories, they say, "Oh, wow, I must have been abducted. I had this mark. Something happened to me." And then they sort of retroactively remember these sorts of events. And that was what was happening in this case. So there were no cases of somebody being caught with a needle attacking anybody. It was always something that happened afterwards. And when medical doctors were asked about this, they said this probably didn't happen because, just as you mentioned, I mean, if you're being injected by a needle. I've been injected by needles. This. This is not a surprise. It's not, "Oh, what's that?" It's like, and furthermore, in order for, I mean, there certainly are some drugs that you can put in people. Propofol is famous. That's what killed Michael Jackson. So there are certain substances that can be used for this, but you would need to inject the person with enough drugs to have it take effect immediately. So again, you can't just sort of touch somebody really quick. You need to do a whole thing. And layered on top of this, and this is where the other part of the boogeyman comes in, is that the needle spiking panic got conflated or mixed in or lumped together with actual cases of drink spiking. So this is, as you know, this is a real thing. It's legitimate. This is a known problem. You know, where at nightclubs, it's not common, but it occasionally happens where somebody, usually a man, will spike a woman's drink and then assault them later on. So again, this is a known thing. This is actual, legitimate. This is real. It's a known problem. Again, it's not very common, but it does happen. And people were assuming that because the drink spiking happened, that the needle spiking thing is all mixed in with it, whereas in fact, it wasn't happening at all.
Now, I don't want to put fear into people, but it could be that there was, well, I don't know if I should say it like this, but a nutcase that
Sure.
somebody who was well, having some personal fun to see how people react on his or her mixture and etc. When I bump into something, sometimes then hours later I said, oh my God, I have a bruise, but I cannot remember that I bumped myself. I cannot
Exactly.
remember. So it could be, but it could also not be that it is a mass hysteria that it was. Also, something else popped up in my mind, and I don't know if it is a real thing, a real event that have taken place, but somewhere in the back of my mind there is this that somebody with an umbrella just touched your leg, and then a particular
Interesting.
is being absorbed by your skin.
Yes,
So
I had forgotten about that. No, you make a good point. So I know a little bit about that. So basically, this sounds like something out of James Bond, right? Something out of Mission Impossible. But it is true, right? So it is true because I've done a little bit of research on this. So, for example, that has been used as an assassination tool by, for example, MI5, KGB, CIA. I mean, so it is, poison tipped darts. Again, it sounds like something out of a movie, but that has happened. And of course, keep in mind that poisoning, especially high profile poisoning, does happen. You can look at Putin and Navalny. I mean, among many others. There was the other case of the Russian defector and his daughter in England several years back.
Oh,
so
there was a movie about that, I believe, that with milk or something.
Yeah, tea. Yeah, I think it was tea. So again, I mean, they're different things, but in the public's mind, they all get lumped together. They say, okay, well, drink spiking does happen. This is true. Poisonings, governmental poisonings, basically governmental assassinations, they do happen. So that is also true. And then they say, well, maybe this needle spiking thing is true as well. But of course, one thing to keep in mind is that with the assassinations, I mean, these are targeted assassinations. These are people that the CIA or MI6 or Vladimir Putin, they want them dead, right? It's not random nightclubbers in Liverpool, right? It's not some 23-year-old, secretary college student who's out with her friends. These are political dissidents. So there's no reason in the world why some random person would be attacked that way.
How do you investigate something that might not be true? Or better said, how do you personally investigate?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as you know, I've done investigations for many years. I've written a couple books on it, including Scientific Paranormal Investigation. I did a book on lake monsters and things as well. Essentially, the investigation process is the same, whatever the topic is. So this is a common misconception. It's not as if there are methods used to investigate car accidents or homicides or bank fraud or leaking roofs or medical mysteries. And then there's completely separate topics and methods used to investigate ghosts or psychics or crop circles or aliens or things like that. So it's essentially the same process. So this is, again, this is a common misconception that I often come across. People say, well, how is it possible to investigate the paranormal if we don't know anything about it? And that's a flawed premise, because we do know things about it. We do know what people claim to experiencing. So, we don't know for sure what ghosts are or if they even exist. We don't know for sure what Bigfoot is or these other things are. But we don't need to prove that these things exist in order to study them. And the example that I give is, for example, religion. Right. So you have people who are experts on religion. You have rabbis and imams and priests. Right. They are experts in their religion. Now, that just because a priest exists doesn't mean that God must be real. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not a logical premise. Right. Same thing with, so you can be an expert on a topic that isn't objectively or may not objectively exist. I mean, it's entirely possible. You can, there are experts on Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien. There's experts on Star Trek, right? So the series is real, but of course
the technology is Star Trek that we have today.
That we have, exactly.
It looks so much different than it was way back in the 80s or in the 70s, I believe. And today we have cell phones, and today we have automatic doors. So yeah.
So I mean, that's the important thing here. And so so when I'm doing an investigation, there's a couple things I work for, and again, I could talk for 2 hours on this because it's something that I do. But the first step, no. So I mean, the first step is to substantiate the claims, right? Is to pin them down, because oftentimes what's being claimed is both murky and very important. Because if somebody comes to me with a claim and they say this weird thing happened to me, and this weird thing might be a ghost experience, it could be a premonition, it could be an abduction, I don't know what it is, but whatever it is, if someone comes to me with that, my first question is, okay, well, give me the circumstances. Where were you? Were you with somebody else? Are there photographs? Are there videos? Were you in public? I mean, help me understand the circumstances. And pretty quickly, you sort of tease out which of the claims are testable, or what in science we call falsifiable, and which ones aren't. So, for example, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, this is weird thing, I was 10 years ago, I was camping out in the forest with my friend, and it was the middle of the night, and we saw this weird thing in the sky. It was this light and sort of circled around and flew off. What was it? Like,
I don't know.
I genuinely have no idea what the hell that was, right? But it's not because it is inherently mysterious or paranormal or unexplainable. I just don't have enough information to figure out what. I genuinely don't know. It could have been. You guys could have been doing drugs. It could have been a drone. It could have been an alien. I don't know, but I need enough information. So this is part of the process in terms of investigating these things, is looking at the constellation of claims, like the breadth of claims, and saying, okay, well, this is what they're saying happened. These are these 3 or 4 or 5 things, that the main things that are saying happened. And then looking at each one and saying, okay, which of these can we prove? Which of these is there evidence for? Which of these can I actively do something with? So as I mentioned, if somebody just has some claim and says something weird happened, my answer is, okay, good. There's nothing I can do with that. And again, it's exactly the same process. For example, investigating anything else. So, for example, if there's a dead body, let's say there's a dead body, somebody is murdered, and they are found in downtown Paris or Brussels, and the body's found, and then the question is, well, what happened to them? Well, yes. The likelihood of solving that mystery is very high in the city, because there's probably eyewitnesses, there may be cameras, surveillance, the body if it was just found there, it hasn't been there for weeks or months. It's maybe been there for hours or maybe even minutes, right? So police and investigators can quickly zoom in on the most likely explanation for it. If that same body is found in a river or a forest or the Black Forest or somewhere that's remote, and it's been there for who knows, days, weeks, months, nobody knows, right? The chances of solving that mystery are much smaller because the environment, animals have gotten to it, maybe evidence is being lost, there's rain, flood, different things like that. And the point here is that it's the same body in either case. There's nothing mysterious about it. And so it's not that the topics that are paranormal and mysterious are categorically different than the ones that we actually can solve. It's that we need more information from it. So that's basically in a nutshell, that's how I approach it, would be to talk to the person, and I do it very respectfully, right? I'm an investigator. I tell people, look, I'm a skeptic, but I'm an investigator, and I want to know what happened, and I don't know. So, I don't go into an investigation saying, well, this is all bullshit, you're crazy, this is full of shit, there's nothing here. I go in there saying, this is interesting, help me understand what you experienced, because I don't know, I wasn't there. Help me understand what was going on, and let's look at the environment and look at the context and see if there's other possible explanations for it.
So if I give you an example that to stay with investigation methods that you need facts for, or at least enough information to figure out what happened. Well, this is a personal thing, a personal story about, I was, I think, 11, 12 years old, and I was sitting, my bed was underneath my bed window. I was sitting in my bedroom, and I was looking out. It was at night, and neighbors were outside, were walking in the shed and a little bit of working in there. And I was alone. I was looking into my back garden, and it was about, I believe, 15 meters in length. So I looked into this darker path, this little path that was laying behind our house, and something deep, dark, black. I felt it. I could not really see it, but I felt it. And it was walking up and down like an animal pacing up and down. And suddenly it stopped. It looked right at me. And then all the way from the back side of the garden, it jumped. I was sitting on the second level, jumped all over the length, over the 15 meters, right up to my bedroom window, and I could look in. I was staring into those bright yellow eyes of a huge black wolf, and his claws, his forepaws, his claws were into my skin, in my cheeks, and it was tearing up my flesh through my mouth. It was that vivid that I still remember it today. It was that vivid that I had to check my skin, my cheeks, that it wasn't ripped open for real.
Wow.
That vivid. So if I come to you and I tell you this story with this information, how would you investigate that? And what is your first idea of what it was? Because I do think that I have an answer for my own story.
Yeah, that's an interesting case. I'm always intrigued by these stories, especially when there's actually something to go on. Like I said, oftentimes it's these sort of ambiguous, murky stories from 100 years ago, and who knows what's going on. It actually reminds me a little bit of an investigation that I did, and I'll circle back to your case, but it reminds me of an investigation I did about a guy that was claimed to have been healed miraculously. And I wrote about it in one of my books. And this guy, he said that many years ago, back in the 1950s, he'd had this experience, and he'd gone to a church and he'd put miracle dirt on him, and he was miraculously healed. And And the parallel here is, of course, that there was some injury here. And so in your case, there's a couple things that I would first look at. Number one is I would try to look at the circumstances. So ideally, I would actually go there. And I don't know if the house is still existing. I would like to go there and see where this was, and see where the window was, see where it was seen, and measure it out, and just sort of see. I'm curious. I mean, is it? You said 50 meters. I don't know, so I'd want to see it. Yeah, and because one of the things that happens here is that oftentimes eyewitnesses are wrong about certain details. So, for example, I've investigated lake monsters and monster sightings where somebody will say, "Oh, it was this distance," and again, that's just their guess. That's just what they think, right? And then when you actually go to the location, they realize that can't be right. It's either much closer or much further. Usually it was actually much. Usually it was much further away. So people, and we know this from psychology, people will tend to exaggerate, not intentionally, but they will tend to exaggerate
by means of the shock in that moment.
Yes, exactly. So people will. It's the same thing if you've been in a car accident. People will describe time slowing down. Yes. I mean, it happened to me. I mean,
one time myself. Really, that is such an experience. Well, first of all, you do okay, but you do not forget it. Okay, but go on about.
Yeah. So, and again, so here's the thing about that, right? Is that we know that time didn't actually slow down, right? Time didn't stop during this car accident. And again, I've experienced this personally, so I know what I'm talking about, and you have as well. So what we're looking at here is a psychological explanation for part of it. Is our perception quickly zooms in on what's going on here. So there's all sorts of things we could be paying attention to: the lights, the sounds around us, the temperature, how we're feeling, if we're hungry. There are a million things we could be paying attention to. But in that moment, we zoom in on one particular thing. It's whatever's got our attention, and we block everything else out. And in that process, sometimes our memories and our perceptions are distorted. And that's not good or bad. It's just how our brains work. So that would be one thing I would do is I would want to go to the location and measure it out and do a diagram, like pencil it out and get a sketch and say, okay, this is where this was, and maybe there were steps there. Maybe and the other thing would be to, again, because this happened many years ago, would be to get a photograph at the time. And sort of see, okay, well, because things change, trees get bigger, smaller, shrubs, there are many. The environment changes over the years, so I'd want to go to location if possible, diagram it out, and try and recreate what was going on. And then the other part of this that I would look at would be the physical evidence, right? And so you mentioned the scratches on your cheeks. And
those nails, those claws were running really deep into my skin. At least that is how it felt. And sure. I felt it torn open my skin. So that is the reason why I quickly checked that it wasn't real for sure. So
well, you see, right. So this is what I would do, right? Is I would say, okay, well, again, if the experience that was just described to me is true, not that if it's real, because the experience can be real, but it didn't actually happen. This happens in hallucinations and drugs and whatever else. So just because we experience something doesn't mean it's capital R real, right? So when investigating this, I would look for physical evidence, and so that would be one example, right? So if this actually happened in the capital R real world, it wasn't just a personal experience, then the question is, okay, well, did you actually have claw marks on your body? And if so, did you go to a doctor? What did your parents say? Your caretakers, right? And presumably this would be concerning, right? Because if a child, you said you were like 11 or 10 or something, if a child was attacked by some unknown terrifying creature that could have potentially killed them, this would be newsworthy. This would be noted, right? I mean, it might be in the local newspaper. It might make the news. It could be. There should be there should be external evidence that would point to a conclusion. So that's how I would begin this.
Well, it was, imagination. I think it's an incorrect word. But personally, I think that I had a very, very vivid, lucid dream. That is what I think that happened in that moment. Because I wasn't even occupied. My mind wasn't occupied with this grim-like figure. I was just staring into the black sky, watching the stars, hoping that
opening your imagination. Absolutely.
I was hoping that a UFO was passing by and that I was going like, oh my God, what the heck? Oh yes. So okay, fine. I was looking for alien visitations. So that is what I think that happened. That in that moment I had a very vivid, lucid dream. So
that seems very likely to me. And again, I have a degree in psychology, and I'm familiar with these. And it's important that people recognize that identifying it as a likely lucid dream, it's not dismissing it. It's not saying that's stupid or imaginary, or it's not saying that it's not unimportant. In fact, it makes it all the more important because it's an example of how people have lucid dreams all the time. People have memories and thoughts, and you're just leisurely, you're just relaxing. You're imagining what's out there, right? So under those circumstances, especially if you're a kid, you're going to have some vision. So it doesn't. I just think it's important that people recognize that even though it probably was a lucid dream or hallucination or whatever it is, that's not being dismissive. That's not saying that's stupid or silly. It's saying it's something that we all do. It just in that particular case, it was terrifying, and you're talking about it now.
It was terrifying back then.
I'm sure. Well, I'll give you one example that so I've never had that happen, but I have had. I've had sleep paralysis, and I remember this happened maybe 5-6 years ago, and I remember very clearly. I was laying in bed, and I had woken up. It was maybe 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, and there's a little bit of light coming in from the window, and I looked over, and I thought I was awake. I remember being awake, but make of that what you will. I looked over and I saw this big hulking figure like you would see in a horror film. It was not distinct. It was this figure, and it was in the room, and it was darker than everything else in the room, and it was not over my bed, but not too far away. And I tried to move, and I couldn't move. And I physically could not move my arms, could not move my legs, and I could not do anything but sit there looking into this figure, wondering if it's going to come at me or attack me or do something with me. And I waited and I waited and I waited, and finally I fell asleep because if nothing was happening. But I remember crystal clear, it was terrifying and it freaked me out. And at the time, I was absolutely sure that was what was going on, right? It was not, I was like, this is it. I'm going to be killed by this dark thing here. I can't move. What's going on? And then the next morning, I realized that was sleep paralysis. It was a hallucination. It happened in bed as I was asleep, and I kind of woke up, kind of didn't, and I had this experience. And it was so real. It was so real, right? It was so. If you had told me at the time, you're having a vision, I'd say, no, this is actually happening. Help me. Yes. But in the cold light of day, we can sort of see psychological explanations for them.
Have you investigated your own sleep paralysis, the moment, and what the figure might?
Well, a little bit. I mean, again, this happened years ago, and it's and I mean, so the answer is partly yes, partly no. So in my room, there actually is a coat rack, basically. So there was a figure there. So I turned it into a boogeyman, but it was just a dark cloth, that would otherwise be unremarkable, except in the context, right? In the context of feeling paralyzed, in the context of feeling vulnerable in my own bed by myself. I'm the only person in the house. I turned it into a boogeyman when it was sleep paralysis.
I now have to think about a podcast I have done in 2021 with Jason M. the Board, and he was talking about shadow dreams, about Carl Gustav Jung. Do you think that is what's happening in sleep paralysis? I don't know if you had done a lot of investigations within this phenomena, that people see the most creepy stuff in the moment that they experience this sleep paralysis. Do you think that we are creating our own shadow from our inner side, from our interior, and that we are projecting that somewhere in the background of our back?
Yeah, I mean, Carl Jung stuff, much like Freud stuff, it has a place in psychology. I mean, there's a reason why it's sort of fallen out of favor in recent years, recent decades, in fact. Thinking about all the Jungian ideas and synchronicity and shadow figures and things like that, they are more descriptive than explanatory, right? So they're theories about some of the manifestations that we might have about our personal lives and our darker sides and things like that, and they're interesting and they're kind of fun to talk about, but there's no real good evidence for them. There's no, you can't, they're not falsifiable, they're not testable. There's no way to, again, they're descriptive, not proscriptive. They're not something that you can test. You can't, there's no way to compare two shadow figures or to know whether in fact a person's idea is their shadow self is being projected into their fears. So do I think there's any validity to it? Probably not. Is it interesting? Sure. But from a scientific point of view, if you can't prove it one way or the other, then it's neither here nor there. It's a parlor game. It's that idea could be right, or you and I could make up an idea right now, and it could be equally right. So just because Jung and some of his ideas have gotten traction among New Agers, among different groups like that, again, interesting, yes. Provable, scientific, no. So it's a fun story, but I don't know how you would do anything with it.
I don't think that shadow, as Carl Jung tried to explain it, does not fall or does not have a scientific method in that way to prove it with facts, because I think that he was more talking about the projection of self, of your inner fears and anxieties. Being created by a government or a government system or by a religion or by superstition or anyway. I think that is more what happens, but it's a personal idea that is.
I agree. I mean, I agree. It's descriptive, but it's not. When we're looking at different models of the world, right? So there's many different ways of looking at the world. We can look at the world through different lenses, critical thinking lenses, scientific lenses. You can look at the world through many different ways. The question to me is which methods or which prisms, which models are the most useful? Which ones help us literally actually understand the world around us? And some models do, some models don't. And so I mean, people can believe whatever they want to believe. If they want to believe that, conspiracy theories and Jungian shadow, I mean, that's all well and good. But from a practical, pragmatic point of view, it's not a model that helps. It doesn't really, in my opinion, it doesn't get us anywhere. It's a neat idea. It's fun to talk about, but it's not a model that is predictive and useful for understanding the world. It's just an idea.
I don't think that we should try to understand the world. I don't think that our brain is capable of collecting, understanding, converting it into a mathematical formula that we can understand. That is too much information, the world.
No, I'm not talking about understanding the entire world. I'm talking about understanding certain parts of the world.
Okay.
And I would argue that's humans, that's mankind's greatest achievement is trying to understand the world around us, right? We're surrounded by animals and plants that don't really try to understand the world. They live, they grow, they die. They have other kittens, they have raccoons, they have birds, trees, so much around the world. It's living, it's breathing, it's beautiful, it's doing its thing, but part of its mission is not part of its potential is not understanding the world around it, right? If you go to a plant nursery and you buy a shrub or a tree, and you take it from the nursery to your backyard and you plant it in the ground, that shrub or tree isn't wondering, what's going on here? I don't understand. Why am I in a different place, right? It's not.
Why not? We are made of atoms. These things are made of atoms. And it has been said that plants, animals communicate in one way or another with each other. So why isn't it not trying to understand where it is in that environment and trying to communicate with the trees and the flowers and the animals and the birds, etc., that is in that environment, so that it can grow and can balance this?
Well, no, I didn't say it wasn't trying to communicate. What I said was there's no evidence that if you take a tree from one place to another, it's confused, right?
Not in our perception. Okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, it's like, I'm not knocking trees. I'm just saying that there's no evidence that we know of, and if you know something better, tell me. But there's no evidence that I know of that again a plant is trying to understand the world around it except insofar as adapt to it, right? So if you take a plant and you move it from a shady area to a sunny area, it's trying to get nutrients and resources, and it's trying to look for water and get sunlight. But that's not the same as trying to understand the world around it. It's adapting to the conditions that it finds itself in. But that's different than what you and I are doing, which is discussing bigger themes. We're discussing hypnosis. We're talking about mind process. We're talking about bigger things. So again, I'm not suggesting, I'm not even getting the question of whether plants can communicate, because there's good evidence they can. I'm talking about I'm talking about what we were talking about before, which is trying to understand, not just adapt to, but understand the world around us and our place in it. So that's what I would say.
I don't think that science can ever find a method for us personally to understand ourselves. Self, I mean. I think in the moment that we experience sleep paralysis, for instance, and we see this projection, I think that we are doing this by ourselves. This projection from our inside out, that is a moment, or should I say, a bullshit bell for ourselves, that we have to work on something. And I don't think that there is a clear, sterile scientific method that can make us understand that. We have to do that ourselves.
I agree.
I agree. Environment.
Absolutely, I agree.
So if this is possible, that you see a black monstrous thing. In the moment that I had sleep paralysis only once, I saw a grayish transparent young man holding a clipboard. I thought it was more like a student in life, or somebody or something that was observing me while I was sleeping and making notes.
Making notes, see, like what's Maria doing now?
Yeah, but I think that I projected that myself because I have this idea that I'm a student in life and a student in the moment that I meet people and speak with people. So if I can project this student-like figure and you can project this creepy dark monster, do you think that it is possible that we also create this image of aliens, these little gray people with black eyes, in the moment that we have sleep paralysis? Or is it a real objection?
No. I mean, well, I would just back up a second and say that, in those two cases you described, I would say that we didn't actually project them. I mean, the word you used was project. So, so I would say that we didn't so much project them as we interpreted them. So we woke up and we experienced something around us through our eyes and our smell and ears and things like that. And there was an external reality that we tried to interpret. And that was the best that our minds could understand under those circumstances, under, being half asleep and all these sorts of things like that. So it's not like there was something that came out of us into the real world. It was something that was existing in the real world that we interpreted in different ways, in wolves and sleep paralysis and things like that. So when you talk about aliens, for example, the case of aliens is really interesting because we know that the people's conception of aliens is heavily influenced by media portrayals. So, for example, when you have these prominent science fiction films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind or E.T. or things like that, what people interpret as aliens are influenced by what they see on screen and on television. And the same thing happens with monsters, for example. There's an excellent book titled Abominable Science by a colleague of mine, Daniel Loxton and Don Prothero. And in that book, they talk about how, for example, in Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, how people envision the Loch Ness Monster, in some cases how they describe seeing it out on the lake, was influenced by films, including King Kong. Came out in 1933 and things like that. So the point here is that yes, we interpret things around us, and including aliens, from our own lenses. But in doing that, we draw not just on our own assumptions. We draw on films. We draw on media. We draw on TV shows. We draw on what we think or what we assume aliens look like, or what we think or we assume monsters look like. And this is all part of the psychological process. And so this is an important thing to keep in mind, because it's not as if we're blank slates. We're not just tabula rasas that appear and suddenly something appears there and we're interpreting it and understanding it in its raw form. Everything, and as you know, everything that we experience is through our own prisms and our own worldviews. And part of what's influencing these worldviews is media, is TV shows, is our friends. It's there's lots of different things mixed in. And so sort of following up on what you said earlier, I would argue there is no pure experience. There is no singular, one-to-one correlation experience. There is what we're bringing to the experience, which is, as I said, heavily influenced by many things, and what we're taking from it. So in the case of aliens, for example, as I mentioned, people's conceptions of what aliens look like have changed over time. So in the 1950s, you had aliens looking one way. If people are interested, there's a colleague of mine, Joe Nickel, he actually drew out an alien timeline, which is actually really interesting. And he drew different aliens from different, as people describe them, from different eras. And you can see on this image how over time in the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, what people thought aliens looked like changed over time. So it's only pretty recently, for example, that you have the big-eyed aliens and the big head and things like that. And when you look at that, but here's where the kicker comes in, right? Why would that be? why would it be that aliens, either the aliens themselves have actually literally changed over time, right? The form of the aliens is different. Why would it be that if there is some extraterrestrial race that's coming to us in spaceships and abducting people and doing all these different things, why would they have changed form in significant ways? But between, for example, the 1950s and now, it's more likely that the difference is in our interpretations. The difference is in our expectations, not in some external alien.
What do you think an alien really looks like, or an ET or extraterrestrial life form?
I have no idea. I mean, it's just, it depends on so many things. It depends on if they're carbon-based. It depends on if they're silicon-based. Keep in mind that what people think of aliens, and I said before, I mean, it's, where do we get our interpretation, right? Star Trek, right? Star Wars, right? The cantina scenes, where these are other humans' interpretations of aliens. So none of these are pure direct experiences of aliens. They are what some filmmaker or some artist or some experiencer or whatever else, what they're telling us that they think aliens are. So, I do think there probably is life elsewhere in the universe. I don't think we're the only intelligent life, but I also don't think that we've been contacted by it. And assuming that life does exist, it could look like anything. It could look like smoke. It could look like us. It could look like crystals or rocks. It really could be. It could be anything at all.
So you think that Area 51, for instance, is just a military base instead of with advanced technology that is created by human hands, instead of the reversed technology from a different planet or a different galaxy or a different species in the universe?
Yeah, I mean, Area 51 is, it's kind of interesting. I've been there. It's only one state away from me in Nevada. And there's a couple things.
Into the complex. You've been into the complex.
No, I've been at the outside. They don't let you go in without a security clearance. Well, it's the same thing with, like, for example, here in New Mexico, where I live, we have two national laboratories. There's Sandia National Labs and Los Alamos in Santa Fe, and so both of these are government bases. So I can't just walk in there. Right? No. I need clearance. I need to work there. I need to have a reason to be there. Yes. And it's the same thing with Area 51 or anything else. In Germany, in France, in the UK, there are government military bases that the average person can't go in there. It's just you're prohibited. You need security clearances. So there's nothing unique about that. There's nothing mysterious about that. The only thing that makes Area 51 different is that it has this mystique of being, some alien base or things like that. So there's nothing that is special or different or unique about a government having a location where they're doing things that they don't want the Russians or North Koreans or the French to know about.
Except for that Area 51 is built into the ground, into a desert that is that heavily guarded, that if you step up a little bit too close, all those black cars and the security is coming in, or the MPs, I don't know what it might be, those what their function is, but suddenly there is a car up on the hill in the distance, and you go like, oh my God, if I'm going to be shot.
But there's no.
So there is something special about it because it is huge.
But keep in mind what they do there, right? It's an Air Force base. So they test they test drones, they test experimental aircraft, they test spy planes. And so the difference is that again, there's nuclear laboratories and there's national labs all around the world. There's thousands of them around the world. And again, if you try to go into them without authorization, you'll be arrested and or shot. There's nothing unique about Area 51 except, as you mentioned, that this is a huge place. It's much larger than any other national lab. But again, keep in mind what they do there. What they do there is they fly aircraft, and so it's of course again the entire area isn't fenced because it would be you don't need to fence that much area because it's inaccessible in many ways anyway, just because of its remoteness. So the point here is that it's not surprising that I mean there's particular paths in, and there's a guard station, and like anywhere else, you have to be authorized to go in there. But so the fact that the area is so big is not surprising because of what they do there. They fly aircraft to there, and they don't want they don't want anybody, including you or me or Russian spies or anybody else, to be photographing and videotaping because there are legitimate national interests in keeping these things secret. So again, I don't put much stock in Area 51 as being some sort of top secret military base. And in fact, if you look at where these original claims came from, there are several examples. One of them is a guy named Bob Lazar, who told this whole story about having worked there, and he told stories about how he was employed there and he saw crashed saucers and things like that. He lied. He made it all up. It was a hoax. He was proven not to have.
But come on. Bob Lazar was talking about a particular element. I believe it was a radioactive element that wasn't known by the public in the 80s. A couple of years later, or a decade or 2 decades later, they pop up with this mystical element that is, I believe it was 115, but I'm not quite sure what it really was. Perhaps you know, but he told stuff and said, okay, that is what they are doing there, and this is what they were talking about, a new element that is not made public yet, and then decades later they come into the public with it. So you can say he was lying, but he told stuff in front that we didn't know at that moment in time.
Well, right, but he said a lot of things that turned out not to be true. He said that he had a degree from I think it was some school. I mean, again, people, even the believers looked into Bob Lazar's story, and they saw he didn't have the degrees. He wasn't at the base. He was not some top secret scientist. So we know for a fact, and again, this is pretty widely acknowledged. This isn't just me talking. Many people have looked into his claims and background and said it's simply not true. He was not there. So and this ties in with his stories about military bases and extraterrestrials and things like that. So I'm not familiar with his claims about having some particular new element, but keep in mind that even if that one specific item were true, that has nothing to do with aliens.
People saw him go in and out, that he was on the property, that he had clearance to go into that complex. I don't know how far, but okay, anyway, he granted access to that complex. And I believe it was George Knapp who interviewed him for a very long time. And this journalist also said, well, he knew his way around the complex and particular buildings. So if he was lying, how in the belief is it possible that he could find his way in particular buildings or step onto particular grounds?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, as I recall the story, he did have access to the base itself. So it's not as if he was living in Detroit at the time. So he was, it is true that he had access to the base itself. That's not the question. I mean, there are people, there are janitors, there are food workers. There are at these military bases, there are many different levels of security. So there are people that just deliver copy paper. They deliver toner. They service the vehicles. They do maintenance, right? So it's not as if everybody who's allowed onto the base has top secret clearance. That's just not the fact. And so in this particular case, in the case of Bob Lazar, it is true that he had access to the base, but it is not true, apparently, that he had access to anything that was confidential or top secret or anything else like that. And that would explain why. Again, if you're telling me that you're giving me this sort of third-hand story, like, well, he interviewed this guy, and this other guy said that this other guy said that when he went on the base, he knew his way around. I don't know what that means.
I have tried to contact Bob Lazar, but unfortunately, I have never gained a response back. So, darn.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not knocking. I've never met him personally, but I mean, I've seen his story and his claims, and if you end up contacting him, I'd love to see it. I mean, again, this has been known for decades. I mean, this is not new. I mean, many of his claims have been proven to be false, not just by skeptics, but even by other other UFO believers who said that, you claim to have this background. You did not graduate from there. We know you didn't graduate from there. You're either mistaken or you're lying, but you didn't graduate. He's like, well, maybe I fudged this or fudged that. And, at some point you just have to say, okay, well, what else did you fudge?
Well, I can imagine that when I would work in a particular organization and I had some troubles with my colleagues or my supervisor, and I left the company, and that people would try to, well, put you in a bad situation. It could be. I don't know. Unfortunately, like I said, I have never spoken to this man. I would love to. You say, when that Area 51 doesn't like, or at least the people doesn't like it when you photograph there or film there, but the area is that wide, it is more than logic that people can zoom in into stuff. For instance, when they are testing a device that has the ability to use positive and negative cloaking, meaning that it is there and boom, it's not there. Aircrafts, drones, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what positive and negative cloaking you're talking about. What are you talking about?
Well, that it can look like as if it is invisible. That is not there anymore. It is just using its surrounding, so that it's blending in, like a chameleon is blending into the form.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the idea, but I mean, what information do you have that's been being done at Area 51?
Nothing, absolutely nothing. Yeah. But I can imagine that if advanced aircrafts or advanced technology is being created in that facility, then that could be possible that one of those drones.
Well, right. Yeah, I mean, anything is possible. Yeah, I mean, well,
how would somebody create something like that in his or her mind? Okay, anyway.
Well, I'll just add this one other thing, which is that if that is true, and again, I don't have information about that. It sounds, I have seen some research, talking about, I mean, the whole cloaking is basically Star Trek stuff. The idea that you can mask an entire ship, ship or plane or whatever else. As far as I know, that's science fiction. I mean, there is no way to just suddenly make something turn invisible. That's something out of Wonder Woman. There are some advances in people trying to find ways to basically bend light around things. But in terms of making that practical in a military aspect, I don't know anything about that, and frankly, I would doubt that that's true. But even if that were true, there's no reason to think that has anything to do with aliens. And besides that, if that were happening, and if somehow the U.S. had perfected this technology, number one, you wouldn't be able to see it. So you could just take a photograph of the sky and say, well, there's a giant plane there. Do you see that? No, you don't. Well, it's because it's invisible.
Okay, touche. Okay, fine. Why did you become skeptical?
Well, I was always interested in mysteries, right? When I was growing up, I was a boy here in the desert in New Mexico, and I always loved mysteries and strange things and monsters and crop circles and Bigfoot and things like that. So I was always fascinated by them, and so I would do a lot of reading. So as I'm sure you were, I was a very voracious reader as a kid, and I would read books and stuff, and still have many of them behind me here. And for several years as a teenager, I would go to a bookstore and I'd buy a bunch of books. I'd take my allowance money, used books, a bunch of used books. I'd bring home a bunch of books, and they'd be on UFOs and aliens and just the crop circles and weird things. And I was fascinated by them, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing information. But as I read more books and as I became more critical thinking, I realized that a lot of it wasn't good information. It was just sort of, they say, right? It is said that, and somebody said, an anonymous source this and that. And I said, well, hold on here. I'm reading these books and they look very official. They're printed. It must be true, right? It's in the person's name is on there. So to a teenager, this is very impressive. Like, well, I don't know any authors, right? They wrote their name on there. This must be sort of true. And of course, this is you and I go back ways. This is back in the 70s and 80s, before the internet. And so it was very, very impressive to me. But as I read more and more, I said, how do we know this is true? And so I became skeptical of some of the claims because sometimes they're contradictory. I said, well, this book says this, but this book says that. Neither one of them is giving me evidence. They're just sort of telling stories. And so I decided that when I grew up, I wanted to investigate these things, but I wanted to do it from a scientific point of view and critical thinking. And I said, look, these are interesting topics. I love ghosts. I love mysteries. I love aliens. These topics are fascinating. This is why we just spent the last hour talking about it. But to me, I want to go more than just, is it interesting, but is it true? Is this real? Is there another explanation for it? If these things are real, then that's great. Let's go find the Bigfoot. Let's go look at the alien technology. Let's go investigate the ghosts and the psychics. And this is a wonderful, amazing thing. But if they're not true, then we should know that as well, right? And we should know that because we need to find out what's true about the world. And if these things, if there's not good evidence for these things, then the question becomes, well, why are people experiencing things or reporting things that aren't actually happening? What is the psychology behind it? What is the mechanism? What are people mistaking for these things? So that's sort of what brought me into it.
I think they are truly happening. This is a personal idea that we are made of atoms, and the atom is for a large part empty. And as Dr. Sheen Carroll also theorized, perhaps this emptiness is containing from waves, and these waves can get amplified, and by means of everything inside ourselves is communicating in one way or another, and by means of the theory of a cellular memory, that we have stored a particular knowledge from our ancestors inside of ourselves and in our cells and DNA, that in the moment that these waves getting amplified from our atoms, or at least the electron cloud, that the information from our ancestors are being merged with these waves, and by means of the amplified version of it is that we are admitting this, that we are sending this into a small room that is slightly dark, and that we are creating our own imagination or our own knowledge that we have from our ancestors, or perhaps, as Carl Jung stated, our own shadow, and that they are truly happening, but that we are projecting this really into the atmosphere in that moment. I think that could be an idea to look in, to investigate in, if you want to merge the paranormal with science. Benjamin, these things about Area 51 and the anxiety, sleep paralysis, government putting fear, or government organizations putting fear into the general public, Boogieman, that is what we can find in your upcoming book?
Yes. It's less on the sort of monsters and paranormal topic, and more on sociology and psychology and basically media literacy, sort of talking about the use of boogeymen and stuff. So yeah, I mean, as you know, I do a wide variety of things. I research urban legends and folklore and education, psychology, and I'm just trying to, just like you, I'm trying to, make sense of what's going on around. So that's what I'm doing, and the book should be out in probably June or July, and the title's America the Fearful. From McFarland Publishing. It's my 13th book. So unlucky, I don't know. We'll find out.
That was my next question. When is the publication date? But you stole my question.
I don't know. They haven't told me. It'll be a surprise to me, but I think it's in July or August.
Okay, that's an exciting period that is upcoming in this moment. Benjamin, I see that we are past the hour, so I'd like to thank you for this amazing interview. It's very interesting, all these mysteries combined or merged with today's activities and etc. But before we close out, where can we find more information about your books, your research? I believe you also make film documentaries, and where people can contact you if they still have questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to talk to people. You can find me on social media. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I never figured out Instagram, so don't look for me there. I have a podcast called Squaring the Strange. Squaring, like a square, and the strange. It comes out about every 2 weeks. And we're now in our 5th year of this, so this is kind of fun. Check. Yeah, thank you very much. Check it out and subscribe. That's where I'm doing. You can find most of my books on. I always encourage people, if they can, to go to a local bookstore. I know, particularly in Europe, that's sort of not viable. So you can always check it out on Amazon. And that's basically where I am. And again, I'm on Twitter at BT Radford, and on Facebook. I love caricatures, so if you want to, look for a caricature of this face, and it'll probably be me. So
I'd like to thank you all for tuning in today on the Next Truth podcast's Let's Ask Questions. Make sure to visit our website. That is www.nexttruth.com. That is nexttruth, all in one word, .com. And let us know what you think about our podcasts. While you're at it, if you find value in this show, we would appreciate a rating on our website in the section Testimonials. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel and share the links on your social media. I am Maria Anna van Driel with the Next Truth. Let's Ask Questions. Be sure to stay tuned for our next episode.